activist, and an alumna of the Central European University. She is currently the project coordinator for the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung in Ecuador in the area of trade unionism and feminisms. Also, she is a part of the plurinational and popular Parliament of Women in Ecuador. Thank you, Kruskaya, for being here with us today. And now it's over to you. You can start whenever you want.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm glad to be with you here today. I want to start to thank you, Baylor Institute of Technology, for inviting me to this webinar tribute today. And also, I want to thank all the people that are connecting today. I know that in India is almost dinner time, in Latin America is early morning. So thanks for taking the time to be here with us. I want to thank all the people behind the screen that make this event possible. We know that in events, we just see the speakers and the moderators, but there are so many behind that make logistic, communication. And last but not least, I want to give special thanks to my friend and colleague, Shilpi, for giving me the opportunity to talk about these women that I admire so much, that is Maria Lugones. I want to start this tribute putting positionality debates into practice, to reflect on the role that researchers play in their studies, and in this case, in speeches. This involves making a clear statement about my own place of enunciation, who I am, where do I come from, and my motivations for doing this tribute. So, I am an Ecuadorian woman, I am a feminist activist, and a feminist researcher. I know Maria's work for around 6-7 years now, but I came closer to her contributions since 2016. I was doing my MA in gender studies in Europe in 2016. In fact, Shilpi was my classmate in Spain, and I know that Carolina and Mercedes were our classmates also, and they are here today, so thank you very much. Being a Latin American woman in Europe means to face racist essentialization, hypersexualization, and exotization in a daily basis. Inside the university, I face epistemic violence and epistemic racism. And outside, on the streets, at bars, with people, I was a woman of color, within all those white men colonial fantasies. So, Maria Lugones' work and Chicanas writers, as Gloria Saldúa, became my refuge. They provide me epistemic tools to understand my own existence, how women of color, as a racialized women, as a migrant woman from the global south. But also, they helped me when nobody else did it. Thus, I'm here today to talk about the tremendous contribution of Maria Lugones to social science, to philosophy, to decolonial studies, to feminism, but also, and most important, to reflect on the many ways her work has touched me. So to doing that, I have a small PPT I'm gonna show you right now, so we can just go through the terms and contributions while I'm talking. So give me a second. Can you see it? If someone can confirm if you see the presentation.
Yes, we can see it, Kruskaya. We can.
Great. So today I decided to call my presentation Toward a Decolonial Feminism, the work and works of Maria Lugones. And in order to do such, I want to divide this talk in 3 parts. So first, I want to focus on the major contribution of Maria Lugones to decolonial studies. Secondly, to reflect on Maria's Lugones' theoretical and methodological contribution to feminist and decolonial feminism. And at the end, like some reflections to conclude what it means to do decolonial approaches, to do decolonial research. So The colonial epistemic term was introduced in the early 20th century by, among others, Webb Du Bois, who gave rise to a genealogy of thought that will later influence the most important race theories of the century, such as Saussure and Frank Fanon. Within this epistemic term, racism is understood as the product of colonialization of the peripheries by the European colonial power. Thereby, racism is a social classification of populations created by the modern colonial capitalist Eurocentric power. In this sense, the colonial studies oppose the classic imaginary within social science, view racism as only a social problem derived from biological pseudoscience and philosophical discourses. Aníbal Quijano develops a historical theory of social classification by introducing the framework of coloniality of power to understand the globe, Eurocentric capitalist power. Quijano argues that within the conquest of the Americas, European forces introduced a social classification through the coloniality of power. Thus, the idea of race was a social construction derived from and imposed by European colonizers in the Americas to differentiate, classify, and hierarchize people within capital societies. It was imposed in a global scale. So after the Americas, they took this social classification to Africa, to Asia, and to all the colonies. Such classification is the fundamental axis of power patterns, hierarchizing human groups between inferior and superior, irrational and rational, primitive and civilized, traditional and modern. According to Quijano, the coloniality of power is not just a racial classification. The control of sex, authority, labor, subjectivity, and knowledge are articulated around the coloniality of power. Racism and colonization were internalized by subaltern. As Fanon claimed, the colonized are forced to assimilate the culture of colonizers, and in so doing, internalize colonial bourgeois thinking. Knowledge itself is hierarchical, and such non-Western knowledge is classified as inferior, barbaric, and belonging to the past, while Western science is considered superior and exclusive to modernity. So Maria Lugones expands Quijano's coloniality of power to argue that there is a modern colonial gender system in which gender, and not only race, has been constructed through the European conquest of the Americas. According with Quijano, through the coloniality of power, there was imposed a coloniality of gender relations. On the one hand, ideal European patterns of sexual behavior and familiar organization constructed the model of the bourgeois family, where men were allowed sexual freedom and women were expected to be chaste or monogamous. On the other hand, free access of white men to Black, Indians, and colored women in the rest of the world. However, Maria Lugones argued that there is the light side and the dark side of colonial modern gender system, where Quijano's coloniality of gender relations was just the light side. With this, we mean that this relations changing was just the point of the iceberg, the top of the iceberg. However, she develops this distinction by claiming that there were different understandings of sexuality and gender relations through all the Americas before the European forces arrived. In fact, in Americas and in Africa, there were egalitarianism, not gendered and genocentric forms of organization and identity. That happened also in India, for example, before the British arrived. So the notion of coloniality of gender unveils how coloniality reshaped gender structures in specific ways around all the colonial territories. There was a violent imposition of heterosexuality. So the Eurocentric globe, capitalism, is heterosexual. Thus, Western heteronormativity and heterosexism regimes consolidate a settlement narrative of binary gendered construction of colonialism. The colonial mother gender system constructed not white bodies as animals, in particular women. In contrast, white women were seen as females, but not as women. European colonialism created a whole narrative of sexuality of colonized women. What I mean with that is that since colonialism and the conquest of the Americas and after the whole war, women of color were seen as animals. So they were seen as extremely hypersexualized females that were objects. So the colonizer can rape them whenever they want, for example. They were not perceived as women with souls or with human rights. So all these narratives putting in women of color are coming until today. So racism on the bodies of women are coming from the conquest time. So from 1492. With this brief explanation of the colonial studies and Lugones' category of coloniality of gender, I want to conclude this first part by saying that the colonial perspective reveals the importance of historicizing racism and racial and gender classification in order to understand race and gender hierarchies arise in the context of colonial modern capitalism with the hegemony of the Eurocentric world. As Quijano and Lugones said, race and gender are both fictions, but powerful ones. So with this, I want to start talking about decolonial feminism. Just a second. So, as you can see, I put here a S in capital letters because feminism is not just one. There are feminism. So different kind of ways of understand feminism, different theories, different theoretical and political proposals. So as you know, from all the history of feminism, there have been different discourses and different fights. And one of them, from the women of the global south, women of color, migrant women, was putting on the table there were a different kind of feminism because there were different kind of women. Women are different. There are heterosexual women, lesbian women, migrant women, cisgender women, transgender women. So when we're talking about feminism, there are praxis coming to our communities. They're talking about our struggles. They're talking about us. So that's the importance of thinking about feminism in plural. And that happened also with the colonial feminism. I want to say today that there is not just one way of being a feminist, and there is not a one way of thinking and constructing the colonial feminism. In fact, we are reshaping, rethinking, building our own ways of the colonial feminism with our communities, with our territories, with our bodies in our daily life. So by saying that, I want to present a small, brief context of the colonial feminists to focus in Maria Lugones' contributions. So the colonial feminism, according to the Afro-Dominican thinker, Juderquis Espinosa, is a movement in full grown and maturation that proclaims itself revisionist of theory and political proposal of feminism because it Western, white, and bourgeois bias. Thus, as the other Afro-Dominican thinker, Ochi Gurriel, argues, the colonial feminism is a radical rereading of history and histories in which colonialism is transversal and oppressions are intrinsic elements of modernity. So with these two concepts, I want to focus in the fact that decolonial feminism is a Latin American proposal. So are coming from thinkers in Latin America, from Latin America, and mostly from women of color in Latin America. Black women, indigenous women, migrant women in Latin America. So decolonial feminism incorporates Maria Lugones' concept of modern colonial gender system to understand that history is crossed by the denial of humanity of non-white, indigenous, and Afro-diasporic women. Therefore, race and gender are interlocked and inseparable. Colonial modernity and global capitalism have benefited, and still do, from the double subalternization of non-white women. With this, for example, this category of double subalternization, you can find it in Indian thinkers as Spivak, for example, or Mohanty, that they are also talking about this double subalternization of women of color, because they are subalterned by the gender, so by being a woman, and also by being a woman from the global south. So, to talking about Maria Lugones' contribution, I want to go deeper to understand who was Maria Lugones. As Shilpi was saying, she was an Argentinian philosopher, activist, and professor. And she was also a lesbian woman. She was articulating her activism also through sexual orientation and sexual identity. But I want here to mention and be strong in the fact that she was an activist. And I think that that made her a very special thinker, because she was not just an academic or a researcher or a professor. She was in the grassroots of the movement. And they made her to think about the political compromise and political objectives of doing research, of writing, of being an academic. And as I was saying, she was actively in social movements, especially in the third world feminist movement in the US. And what I mean with that, it was a social movement in the US between the 60s, 70s, and 80s of women of color and migrant women in the United States, coming from the global south. So there was a coalition of women from Asia, from Africa, from Latin American origins, and Chicanas in the States. And to start focusing in the contribution, I want to read this quote of Maria Lugones that I think that englobes her philosophy compromise. I refuse to think what I'm not going to practice. So that is that all these theories that we're talking about, all these concepts, cannot be just in paper, cannot be just in our thesis, on our writing, on our books. If I'm not putting in practice what I'm saying, what the theory is for. So Maria Lugones have a lot of contributions for decolonial feminism, but I want to focus just in 3 categories. I know that this tribute to Maria Lugones will have another webinar where you are gonna go deeper to different concepts of Maria Lugones. So just to say that Maria put women of color in the spotlight who are victims of coloniality of power and coloniality of gender. This interrupts the hegemony of predominant white feminists in Latin America until then, establishing the foundations of decolonial feminism. So I decided to focus in these 3 categories to talking today. So la mestiza, that is a term in Spanish, I'm gonna go deeper, but it means hybridity, purity, and impurity, but the literal term of mestiza is mixed race. The other term I want to focus is coalitional identity. That was a term introduced by Maria Lugones to social science in general. And the third term is intersectionality. As you know, intersectionality was not introduced by Maria Lugones. We're going to talk about also the history of the term, but Maria Lugones expand the category of intersectionality by understanding that gender and race are interlocked, are inseparable. So, la mestiza, the idea of la mestiza means something different in different geographies, locations, and temporalities. The term mestiza originally came from the context of racial mixture after the conquest of the Americas. La mestiza in Latin America addressed mixed race, a group of people that historically had been privileged over indigenous and Black communities. However, in 1994, Maria Lugones conceptualized la mestiza as a metaphor for both both impurity and resistance. Lugones provides a reading of the purity-impurity dichotomy as a hybrid imaginary. She argues that dichotomy is forming structures of discrimination. The white subject becomes the pure subject. Western culture is a synonym of purity. And instead, the people of color, the communities of the global South, we are perceived as impure until today, right? It is here that la mestiza constitutes form of resistance to the politics of purity. La mestiza, in Lugones' word, is unclassified, unmanageable. She has no pure parts to be had, to control it. So, la mestiza, as a person and as a stage, implies the possibility of transgressing the limitations of colonial modernity. Hybridity, borderlands, negotiation of identity is some of the tools and the concepts that can be joined by la mestiza. For feminist work, la mestiza called us to understand the oppressions of categories. We're not just one thing on another. We are a crossroad of many borders, many categories. What I want to say with this, that when we are thinking of activism or social movement, but also in academia, we are organizing our thought by categories: woman, men, transgender woman, migrant, people of color, white subject. But the thing is, like, these categories are imposed by modernity. And they are so limited to explain our complex identities. And so la mestiza also push us to think outside the box, to think about these crossroads, and also understand that in impurity, outside the control subjects by modernity, we have tools to resistance and for liberation. So second, coalitional identity. In the modern colonial system, identities are shaped by racial and gender categories of exclusion. In this sense, coalitional identities or coalitional identity is more than an identity defined by the exclusion of racial description. It is a communal articulation and understanding of practices of resistance on the basis of historical, located, situated, and multiple identification and interdependence. A coalitional identity is the impulse to come together to resist multiple ways of oppressions. Coalitions are not just theorized, but lived possibilities. To understand coalitions as something that we articulate by practicing it every day. This concept comes from her work with and for social movements, feminist collectives. Beating of building in diversity must build new plural identities in coalitional identities. For her, for Maria Lugones, coalition was and is a space always in formation and transformation in which we coexist, learn and understood life oppressions and resistance. So a coalitional identity gives us the possibility to rename ourselves. So it's not that imposed category that I was saying before. When I was in Europe, I was a woman of color. I was a Latin American woman. That categories were imposed on my body and my existence by the Europeans, by the European modern colonial system, by coalitional identity. Give us the possibility to rename our identities with a group of people and of movements. So in fact, if I want to call myself right now a Latin American woman, it's coming from a way, and the group that I'm coming from, in a renaming this category. So for me, my identity is completely different from those racial and colonial fantasies and modern colonial categories. And with intersectionality, Maria Lugones argues that the theory of oppression must be liberating. She sees the importance of intersectionality, but just a provisional stage, since theoretical production should provide oppressed people the ontological or a metaphysical possibility of liberation. So when we're thinking of concepts, of theories, of knowledge production, this is not the objective. The objective is liberation, is give tools to liberation, to freedom. By bringing the colonial feminist frameworks to the debates of identity, we can have deeper understanding of intersections of oppressions and sense of intersectionality. In 1989, the Black legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw introduced the term of intersectionality to address Black women's specific location and intersections of multiple systems of subordination. She was talking specific of anti-discrimination laws in the United States in 1989. And she was explaining that intersectionality was a crossroad. So she used the metaphor of two streets, so two cars that are coming both in different streets, and in some point these two streets cross. Intersectionality in this way has become one of the most common employed approaches within feminist scholarship to study oppressions. However, decolonial feminists argue that there is a lack of analysis of historical situations that produce those intersection categories. And also that it seems that with Kimberly Crenshaw concept, the categories are separable and in some point they cross, as I was saying with this metaphor. There was two streets completely separate and in some point they cross. But as Lugones argue, they are not as separate, they are interlocked. Gender and race are interlocked. And also, as Lugones argues, there is a lack of analysis of coloniality in this intersectionality meaning at the beginning. But after 3 decades of theorizing and rethinking intersectionality, now we have a more complex understanding of oppressions by and with intersectionality. From a decolonial feminist perspective, in the core of the analysis, we must understand that the categories of race and gender have been created by the colonial modernity. That means that they are not just simple axes of differences. They were the pillars of global capitalism and they hold contemporary coloniality. In this way, we must establish a relationship between oppressive realities and global capitalism, colonial modernity. And for instance, race and gender are not just categories of analysis, but intermediate life experiences. As I was saying before, they're inseparable. So I'm gonna stop and for this, to conclude, the colonial thinking implies a new intervention of text, a new construction of history, a new way of writing inside academic research, including introspective of our own colonized knowledge. and praxis by understanding that we live in a modern colonial gender system. In other words, in order to understand the inseparable of race and gender, we must center the historical denial of subjectivities and humanity to indigenous, Afro and non-white women since the European colonization of the Americas. For me, engaging with decoloniality is a political proposal which informs the question of the matrix of power and domination. That implies rethinking my role as researcher and how I want to produce knowledge from a different way. To give space those voices that have been silenced or have been used appropriative outside their context of their activism. Decolonial feminism put in the core center that intersectionality is not simple different layers of oppression, but rather it must understood as the production of a specific and relational effects. With her work on the coloniality of gender and the colonial feminist, Lugones provides new insights to these debates through a colonial perspective and the colonial perspectives of race and gender, because both are fictions of the Americas. The creation of race and the establishment of heterosexuality since 1492 made possible the expansion of global capitalism. She called for a commitment to depatriarchalize academic practices as a way to decolonize them. And this call resonated with me in so many ways. Maria was a tireless fighter whose intellectual and political stature allows her to enrich several interrelated areas and fields of science, from the struggle to eradicate all forms of violence based in the nexus between gender and race, to theorizing the resistance within social movements, and from the practice of popular education for forming political coalitions, to proposing coloniality of gender and decolonial feminism. She believes that theories must be tools for liberation. Her political and academic project was rooted in the political principle of I refuse thinking when I'm not going to practice. In this way, she conjugated the praxis that makes theorizing and the theorizing that makes praxis. Maria's family tells that after her death, she wanted to be a seed because whoever is a seed germinates in others. She knew how to be a germ of many transformations, some more visible, other more personal. And I believe that her work and her struggle was a seed in my life as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kruskaya. You have already given me goosebumps after listening about Maria Lugones. Thank you so much for your enlightening talk. Yeah, obviously you have talked very well, starting from Quijano's coloniality of power to see coloniality of power in a more complex way from gender perspective. Hence race and gender, they are connected with each other when we are thinking about the coloniality. No? So from there, as you entered into the decolonial feminism, which is a Latin American proposal, yeah, decolonial feminism, as you have rightly said, it is plural in nature, it is inclusive, it is not only about feminism, but feminisms. Okay. And decolonial feminism, as you said, are working on many concepts, as we have already, those who have been reading about Latin American texts or theories, they know that they are working already on many concepts, no? And some of them, as you have highlighted today, are hybridity la mestiza, no? And coalitional identity and intersectionality. Okay, thank you so much for your talk today. And yeah, and I would like to invite questions and comments. If you have any, please write in the chat box. All the participants, please write your questions and queries or comments in the chat box. Okay, Kruskaya, we have already one question, I think, and she's asking that she's not clear on the term coalitional identity. Okay, does it, and she's asking, does it refer to mixed identity of a person belonging to various cultures? And this question is from Varisha Kumar. Yeah.
So we're going by one, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So thank you, Barisha. And I think that your question is really important to expand in the concept and idea of coalitional identity. So coalitional identity is not just for one group of another. So it's not just for women from Latin America, or as you were saying, this idea of identities, but is coming from the idea of creating identity that represent ourselves from the struggles of modern system. So what I want to say with that, as the European mother matrix establish identities to us, establish categories to us, with coalitional identity, we have a possibility to renaming ourselves. That doesn't mean that we need to create different names. We can keep saying that we are women of color, for example. But what we mean with that is completely different than what the colonial center put in us. For European matrix, people of color are primitive, are inferior, right? And the thing is that to putting us and saying we are not that categories, we are not that meanings, we are reshaping our identities. And to go in deeper on that, when Maria Lugones were thinking about coalitional identity, she was thinking about movements. So for example, in feminist movements, as I was saying before, we are so many and so different. So we are not just, for example, here, we are not just Ecuadorian women. We are indigenous women. There are Afro-Ecuadorian women. There are migrant women. There are also mixed race women, to saying so. So all these women in this family cannot be called just women, you know, or they cannot just call it Ecuadorian women, because there are not only Ecuadorian women. Some of them, they are not even Ecuadorian. So coalitional identity give us the possibility to rethink how we're gonna call us, but it's not just for putting a name. It's for giving us elements to rethink who we are, what we want, how we want to be named. So I hope I respond that. But if there is not clear enough, or if you want me to go deeper, let me know.
It's basically, you're trying to say that we are identifying our own original and real identity, correct?
Yes, in an exercise of refine and rename ourselves, okay, mostly, but also rethinking in plurality. For example, if you and me and all the people that are here today, maybe we can call people from the global south, right? But what that means for us, because what we mean with that is not the same that what the European center or the North was calling us, right? So it's rethinking the ways that we are going to rename ourselves in a political matter.
Okay. So it's not constrained to one gender. It can be other genders as well.
Of course, it's not about gender itself. It's about how we are reshaping our identities. And that can be for women, for transgender women, for men, from people in general. It's renaming our identities in a way of a political objective of liberation.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Varisha, and thank you, Kruskaya. And I would like to invite the questions. You can unmute, dear participants, you can unmute yourself and ask your questions. Okay, I can see there is one comment from Sonia Surbi Gupta ma'am. She is a professor in Jamia Millia Islamia University, New Delhi. So I would like to invite you, ma'am, to please unmute yourself and yeah, say.
Yeah, Shilpi, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. I have already written my comment to Kruskaya, and I would like her to think about this. While I completely agree and I join her in paying tribute to Maria Lugones, and I absolutely admire the work of Anibal Quijano and the Latin American decolonial thought in general. But I think my critique of decoloniality is that it looks like a diasporic third world intellectual angst being expressed, you know. So the entire thing is expressed in terms of geographical space, Europe, non-Europe, and color. The category of class, of course, is never discussed. And in that context, I would like Kruskaya to kind of think about her comments on the role of colonial modernity in India. Because you said that oppression is intrinsic to colonial modernity, and like the British, you made some comment about the British in India, and I'd like to just bring to your notice, Kruskaya, that the caste system in India, unlike the racial stratification which came with 1492 and the conquest and colony, the caste system in India predates colonialism. And in fact, colonial modernity in many ways helped the Dalits by giving them access to education. For example, it was in the missionary schools that many Dalits could get entry into schools, which was otherwise denied to them by caste Hindus. So I think we need to realize that we cannot always think in terms of, Europe, non-Europe, or colonial, non-colonial. I think the problem with decolonial thought in general is that it is too caught up in geographical space and color.
Thank you, Sonia, very much. And a lot of the reflection that you're putting on the table are actually really, really strong and really interesting. So I want to first to say to all of you that when I mentioned in India in some part of the presentation was not to essentialize. So actually, I apologize if you read it in that way. And of course, the contexts are completely different. So the idea of the purpose of the colonial thinking is not just generalize and say that all the colonizers are the same, because actually that's one of the things that we are trying to say that there's not. As we were saying, that women are not the same. So the colonizers and all the peripheries of the modernity, we are not the same. So thank you to put that on the table. So first, about class. I didn't mention class in this presentation, but that doesn't mean that intersectionality is not taken into account. Actually, intersectionality is not just talking about gender and race. It's talking about class, identity, sexual identity, and so many other things. So the purpose of intersectionality is not working just with two categories. It's actually thinking that all the oppressions are interlocked. All the matrix of domination is interlocked. So as we cannot say class is something and gender is something and race is something, we need to put all together. So something that in the Latin American context happening a lot is that poor classes are indigenous and Black communities. So you see here, there is a clear interlock of class and race. And in the whole world, we know that women are poorer than men. So there is a feminization of poverty, right? So there we can see class and gender interlocked, plus race, of course, because poorer women and poorly communities are coming also from certain specific minorities, right? Or communities, as Black communities, indigenous communities. So intersectionality is linking oppressions interlocked, not just gender and race. So I hope with that I put in class also in the debate. And what you were saying about colonial modernity, of course, the dynamics of Africa, Asia before 1492, of course, they were setting. And as you mentioned, the caste system was before the colonized of the Americas. But so we are not saying that didn't exist. But what we are saying with the colonial studies is that after the colonization of America, Europe established race and gender around the world. And that also reshaped the history of India. So I'm not saying that the caste system was extremely changing or not. As you were saying, for example, you put this example, that after the conquest of the British, some castes have access to the education. So we're not saying that colonization itself was only bad, but after the conquest of the Americas, I'm gonna change it to saying that the Americas were a laboratory to construct race and classification. So when the British arrived to India, they also established a classification, a race classification and a gender classification, right? They bring all the patriarchy and heterosexual relations that were coming from Europe. And after with the Victorian times, they were more extreme. And of course, I'm not gonna go deeper there because you are experts in that. More, of course. But I think that the key element here is like to see how with the colonizer of Europe, in all the colonies, in the peripheries, they establish a way of thinking, a specific way of thinking, and a specific way of life. And they create this fiction of race, and they create this fiction of gender. I hope that I explain a bit. And I also want to mention that I was focusing today on real, like specific elements, but the decolonial thinking, going outside all these categories, one of the purpose of the colonial thinking is to rescue all the knowledge that we have, we, not just Latin America, Africa, Asia, we have before the conquest of the colonizers, of the European empire. So it's a way of thinking that we have so many knowledge before the conquest. And the decolonial way is trying to rescue that, to bring that knowledge, to put on the table. Not in a centralized way, because that knowledge, of course, changed after five centuries of colonialization, of more or less, but that is recover all the praxis, all the authors, or the thinkers that are not coming from the European matrix. And yeah, I'm gonna end here, but Sonia, like, thank you very much, and I will like to hear from you, to hear your comments.
Yes. So Kruskaya, thank you very much. I think I agree on most counts with you. So I do believe that the category of race and and color, was in fact brought in, and not only with the indigenous masses but also with the African slave trade, which the slave trade which brought in so many Africans. In fact, the idea of color first came to the Afro, to the African slaves. So in that extent, I completely agree with you, and I am in general conformity with the decolonial thinking. I agree with you that there are knowledges which are available in the world which do not constitute knowledge because of the kind of tools, epistemic tools that have been developed in the North, which do not recognize, for example, the knowledges that you have mentioned have existed. I do not want to fall into the kind of revivalism that this may entail, because in India today we are having a kind of a discourse where they are saying everything was available in India. So it's a very non-scientific discourse, I think there's a danger there So we have to be very careful when we say what kind of knowledge are we talking about. So we are talking about, so these are small little nuances which I want to bring into the discussion. But also I want to mention the wonderful work of Silvia Federici, Caliban and the Witch, which is about what capitalism did to European women who, so I think since we are talking about feminisms, I think we need to see that capitalism, how it subordinated women, made the women's bodies as commons, and the women, of color were doubly subalternized, as you said very rightly. In the case of India, the Dalit women are triply subalternized because of caste, class, as well as, so this, as well as of gender. So I think these are very important things which you have brought into the discussion. We are grateful to you, very grateful to you. I really wanted to listen to you because we teach decolonial thinking in my university, Jamia Millia Islamia. I take a course on Latin American intellectual thought and the epistemologies of the South, it's called. So I think there is a lot to share in terms of epistemologies of the South. And I'll close my comment by saying that Gayatri Spivak has, brought out the Seagull book series. It's called the Elsewhere series. And she mentions that even the intellectuals that are mentioned from the global South are intellectuals who are housed in some department of a US university or a European university. She mentioned herself as one. And so, so she says, and therefore she has brought in the translation of René Zavaleta Mercado, whom nobody knows. We don't know. No one knows Mariátegui in India. So I think there is a big need for an India Latin America exchange, intellectual exchange, in order to have a decolonial thinking, which is not just vis-a-vis Europe, but people like you and me. So I think the academia needs to have many more of these interactions, and I'm extremely grateful to the Department of Foreign Languages of the VIT for having given us this opportunity to listen to you.
Thank you, Sonia. Sorry, I just want to say two things to go with other questions because I know that there are so many. But Sonia, just to say that I agree so much with you. We must construct this bridge between the South, because for reading you guys, like the production of India, I must wait that the knowledge is translated to English and published in the United States, and after translated to Spanish, I come to Latin America. So as the decolonial thinker Mignolo said, all the knowledge of the South is going to the North first, and after going to others. So we don't have a direct exchange between India and Ecuador. So we have exchange India, the US, Ecuador, the US, and after we hoping. So thank you very much, and thank you, Shilpi, for this exchange. And I hope, Sonia, to keep in contact with her, because there are so many things that you said that I will love to talk also, to start a conversation, but I know that there are other questions.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, Sonia Surbi, ma'am. It was wonderful listening to you. And yeah, and thank you for bringing the Indian context, talking about Indian women, those who are triply marginalized, and talking with Kruskaya. Then she is talking about indigenous women from Latin America. It was wonderful. Okay, we have more questions. So we are, I'm calling Carolina. She has put up her question here in the chat box. Can you come up? Can you unmute yourself, Carolina, and ask your question?
Hey,
so much.
Hi, thank you so much. I feel so happy to see you and have the discussion, and also love Maria Lugones, It's just that, Cruz, you mentioned the category of La Mestiza, and well, I really love this concept, and I would like to hear some more, maybe I resume how this mestiza can be like a practice of resistance that we also mentioned. This purity and impurity, how to break this dichotomy and really work on and a resistance for our movements, for example. Thank you.
Thank you, Caro, and I'm really happy to be here in this exchange with you and also with other friends from Latin America. So thank you very much. And so with La Mestiza, Lugones introduced these categories of purity and impurity. And she presents this dichotomy as how Western knowledge is constructed in dichotomies, right? Also, gender is a dichotomy itself, so a binary dichotomy. So with the idea of purity, some knowledge is pure, and also some people is pure. Some subjectivity and bodies are pure, and others are impure. And impure means color, means folklore, means coming from South, means not speaking English or French when there was a time that the imperial language was French and after English, right? So what Lugones present is that impurity is not just thinking of inferior. It's not just thinking of something that is not the West. Impurity, as if we just try to find a definition of impurity, impurity means that there is a mix, right? That is a hybrid something. So, and she used this amazing metaphor of an egg. And she said, in an egg, you can see these two parts, right? But if you open an egg and miss it, these two parts are coming together, right? And she said, that's impure. So with impurity means that there are so many differences in us. And that can be understood outside the box, can be understood that we cannot classify. So to put an example, if I said, I'm a woman of color, and a feminist, and I'm a migrant woman, and I start putting all these categories, it looks like these categories are working separately, right? But the thing is, like she said, all these categories together make us in the borders. It's not that we are one thing of another. We are in these borders. For example, with the people that live so many years in other countries and after return to their countries. It's not that just I arrived to my country and I'm again an Ecuadorian. That doesn't mean that I left to be an Ecuadorian when I was living outside. But when I return to my own culture, to say so, to put in those terms, I'm gonna be in between borders. I'm gonna bring things of the other territory where I live from, and I'm gonna have things from my own territories, and I'm gonna be in these lines, in these betweens. And I think that with that, what Maria Lugones is saying, and also Chicanas are saying, is that we cannot understand our identities or lives just by thinking of categories. We need to understand that we are always negotiating things. We are always coming and leaving spaces. And so I think that can help us in movements to think the complex reality of ourselves. Sometimes we come in closer with people, for example, with, I don't know, with Brazilian women, you are also there, is a movement, Magdalenas, right? And we're thinking that we are just all together because we are having this objective in common. But what Lugones is thinking is like, it's not just about the color of the nationality, it's also all these boundaries that we are shifting every day and all these negotiations. So I think that La Mestiza also help us to think the possibilities of claiming some spaces in hybridity, because hybridity is going outside this modern classification, this European modern colonial classification. So when you are there in these borders, as Chicanas, for example, they don't know what to say with them. It's like, they are from the US, there are Mexicans, there are migrants, who they are, right? And in that moment, you fraction the system, because they don't know how to call you. They don't know how to treat you, because you are in these betweens. That I think that this is clear with gender, for example. When we are talking about gender terrorism, right? and with no binary gender, what happened with society? You enter to a space and they don't know if you're a woman or a man. Happened to me sometimes when I shave my head and you enter to a store, they don't know if you're a woman or a man, how I treat you. And that is breaking the system. So I think that La Mestiza is breaking the system in many ways, but mostly in identity.
Thank you, Cruz. I really think that this Western imposition of purity is really oppressive in many ways that maybe we cannot realize every day as we are working and doing our work, or with our movements, social movements, because this is the point that sometimes it's really, really hard to break, that we're not this pure we cannot be, because this is something that was invented. We cannot be this standard of white woman or white man in the Western. We are something else, the result of all this context of coloniality and the way I love this concept really. I really was, for me today, is like to think again, many process that I'm living now, and the struggle to try to be someone that you're not, and you never be, because for women of color, we don't have this right to be pure, and we never be like pure. This is not for us, and we struggle maybe for our lives trying to be, since we realize that this is very an abstraction for of this system of oppression, and really look to our beautiful impurity and how we can really build something very new and strong from this, for this conscience, new conscience, La Mestiza. Thank you very much. And thank you, Shilpi. Love you.
Oh, thank you so much, Carolina, for sharing the experiences of being a Latin American woman. And thank you, Kruskaya, for answering the question which Carolina asked. It was wonderful, both of you giving a kind of dialogue here. Okay, now I would like to invite Jacopo Moselso. He is there with us. And he wants to ask a question. He has already put there in the chat box, but I still want him to unmute himself and then ask the question. Thank you.
Hello, Kruskaya. Thank you very much. I was amazed by your presentation. It's visible that you're really passionate about your subject of study. And since I'm also dealing with similar topics, I've been blamed my PhD supervisor of writing a political thesis, basically. He is a 65-year-old white man, straight, living in Europe from a very conservative background somehow. He is leftist in the context of Cyprus, but you know that Cyprus has a lot of implications politically because of the Turkish situation and so on. So people there are very much concerned about trying to be apolitical whenever making some scholarly dissertation. So how do you think that giving a very personal perspective, very passionate perspective on your work can assure you to be apolitical, unbiased, scientifically accurate?
Thank you, Jacob. And when I was listening to you, I was remember also my time as a student in Europe, and I said to you that it's a struggle. There is a big struggle, and I think first I want to start with the last that you were saying. This a thing of try to avoid bias and try to be impartial or neutral or how we can be like scientific accurate. And I think that that's one of the things that we are fighting against, because not just the colonial modernity that comes before, positivism that comes from the Greeks, right? The philosophy of positivism, that is kind of the mother of all the modern science, right? It's a fallacy, because they're saying that when you produce knowledge, you can be neutral. And that's not true, because the knowledge is not something that just comes. The theories is not just appear one day. For example, Marxism. We were talking about leftists, right? So Marxism is not just one day appears. Marxism was writing by a man, right? A European white man that was Marx. So there is people behind the theories and the concepts. And those people have a specific gender, a specific race, and a specific sexual orientation, right? A specific nationality. And all those things are giving elements to write those theories. So those theories are biased. All knowledge is biased because I write those knowledge. For example, today, I'm talking about feminism by my own experience as an Ecuadorian woman, as a bisexual woman, as a migrant woman, as a feminist woman. So I put all the things here. I cannot just pretend that what I'm talking to you is neutral, because it's not. So I think that that's the first element to debate about knowledge and be unpolitical or political. To be unpolitical is be political, because you took a decision. And the decision was not mention yourself, not doing positionality, and pretend that you don't have a decision, but you have it. And you have a certain way of thinking. So I think that that could be, and I recommend yourself, if you want to put these debates on your thesis, to read positionality debates. I think that that's a key word, and feminists have a lot of production of them. And also I will say to you that Ochi Curiel, I'm gonna write here right now, but Ochi Curiel have a lot of thinking about position yourself. But also I will say that Spivak, for example, Spivak, Mohanty, Rivera Kusikanki, they are talking about epistemic violence, epistemic bias. They're talking about research outside the colonial matrix. So I think that all these thinkers can give you the possibility of argue what you want to argue. Because with academia is that you can say whatever you want if you argue, right? If you have thinkers, because that's what is happening in the thesis, right? If you have people that you are citing and you are saying, I'm saying this because I'm reading and I'm coming from these big debates and genealogies, you can do it. I know that this depends your supervisor, but I think that is a debate that you can do. At least you can bring these voices and hope what happened. But I think that is also an activist. Being a student and a student inside academia is also being an activist. Or at least I think that my role in academia in Europe was being an activist, because I was facing epistemic violence every day. And Jader, Carolina, Shilpi, Mercedes know about that. We were classmates together, and all of us were people of color in Europe. And so being a student was also being an activist, because we were raising and bringing all these voices and all these authors every day. So that's it, Jacob.
Thank you very much for your suggestions.
Okay, thank you so much, both of you, Jacopo and Kruskaya. Okay, there is one, Patricia, she wants to ask a question. So I invite Patricia.
Oh, hello. First of all, ma'am, I really enjoyed your presentation. I hope I'm audible. Hello? Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay. Oh, I really should have written my question down because my memory is not helping me right now. Um, Basically, it's more of an opinion that I want to know. When you were talking about, womanhood and skin color and purity, and it made me think of something, a particular window, a particular space, even in activism and identity, that sometimes we tend to forget. Something you yourself referenced when you were talking about the length of your hair, and that is beauty, like the side of beauty. So you were talking about the La Mestiza, and that reminded me of the racial class hierarchical segregation in Filipino society, of the fair skin mestizo and the dark skin moreno. So my question is more of an opinion as a woman residing in Southeast Asia. The concept of spaces and of classification, how do you see that being applied in this very peculiar modern day context, where you still have the existence of Eurocentric ideals of perfection? At the same time, we have the rise of this ideal of the stereotypical Asian beauty, owing to the popularity of South Korean culture and K-pop culture. However, this stereotypical Asian beauty, the fair-skinned, slanted-eye, thin, slim woman, is again a colonial construction. She either doesn't exist or she's a hybrid. So not more of a question, but simply an opinion. What do you have to say about the politics of beauty in this situation?
Thank you, Patricia. And I'm really amazed of how this exchange between people from Latin America, India, Philippines, like it's really nice. So I'm really happy. And what you're mentioning about beauty is a key element of understanding science as well, because beauty is coming from philosophy. We have all this tradition of Western philosophy since the Greeks, right? That beauty was a fundamental part of the whole construction of the world. And I think that beauty is coming really closely to class, to gender, and to race. As we know, with the gender class, the race classification, there was not just there were people of color and white, but beauty was white, right? And the people of color first were conceived as animals and after as humans, but humans from another category, right? From inferior category. And I think that it's important to understand also beauty as part of these racial categories of racism, because racism is a complex term, but one of the things that coming outside of all the things that means racism is the color, right? The color of the skin was one of the first things that helped the colonizers to make this division of this social classification, this racial social classification. So in the context that you were mentioning in Philippines, I think that one of the fights is changing these ideas of beauty. And that's also meaning what we understand of beauty and what's coming from. So if we understand that all this coming from colonialism, as Carolina was saying, this idea of we want to be pure. I think that this understanding, like more than understanding, is questioning why we want to be pure first, and second, to know we never be pure. Not even in Europe, not even white people, nobody's pure. There is also, like, I mean, the colonial matrix make us believe that purity is white and purity is the North and purity is this Western. But actually, even in Europe, as Sonia was saying, there are so many history of killing or domesticide. And in Europe as well, there are not just a white race. There are so many minorities that nobody's talking about. As the Roma people, for example. The Roma people are so important. There are migrants all around Europe, but they're not even talking about them. So I think that maybe this can be a reflection, but there are not answers. But I think that when you're putting this, it's because also you are thinking about it and you are trying to also change things. So I think that that's the answer. Our own ways of changing things and our ways of questioning the matrix of power, right? Thank you, Patricia. I'm sorry that I don't have a certain answer.
It was more than enough. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Patricia, for your question, and thank you, Kruskaya, for the answer. It was, yes, yeah, nobody is pure here. Nobody is pure in Europe. Nobody is pure in India, and nobody is pure in Latin America or Africa. No, so we all are mestizos, mestizas. No, we all are carrying this impure identity. Yes, true. And yeah, I think there are not any more questions. So okay, so I would like to invite our HOD, Dr. Gaurav Sushant, to give a Thanksgiving note to the speaker and all the listeners. I would like to invite you, sir, Dr. Gaurav Sushant.
Yeah, thank you very much. And good evening, everyone. And good afternoon, Kruskaya. I think it may be around 11:30 there. And good afternoon to the people who have joined from other countries of Latin America, from Brazil, from Mexico. And I think it was a very thought-provoking and very nice presentation given by Kruskaya Hidalgo. And we came through so many ideas from different people from different part of India, basically, I would say, and even from different part of the world. And so many new ideas just came up here. So I hope that everybody must have gained something from this discussion. And I would like to thank Kruskaya for taking time out and joining this webinar. And like, although it's a Saturday, but still people are busy or people need time for themselves on these weekends also. And I would like to thank participants who came in this evening. And especially I would like to thank Sonia ma'am, who was there to just give her opinion and inputs, which was again very informative for all the participants who joined here. And I would like to thank other participants who put up their opinion, questions, everything. So, and also to the VIT who just organized, who supported us by giving us this particular platform. So thanks everybody, and hopefully we will continue with the next webinar. But again, with a new speaker and more vibrant, you can say, topics which can bring up new ideas and a very healthy discussion. So thanks everybody and have a nice day. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I would like to thank you, Kruskaya, from my side. And I thank all the listeners for coming today and giving your time and listening to the speaker today and asking the questions and bringing such a wonderful debate for today. And it's a very important topic. Actually, Maria Lugones, I really loved her when Carolina, she introduced me to Maria Lugones, and then I started reading some of her texts, and it was wonderful. And I thought after her demise, I thought that it is the time that we should bring her back, through her concepts. So it was wonderful having Kruskaya, Carolina, and all the other participants who encouraged with their participation in this webinar. So I thank all of you, and I thank Kruskaya, our guest speaker today. Thank you so much for coming, and hope to see you again in some more webinars. Okay. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Shilpi. I just want also to thank everyone to make this event possible. And thank you, Shilpi, for inviting me. And I just encourage everyone, if they want to keep this conversation, because I'm really enlightened of this debate. So please keep in touch. I will really like this exchange between India and Ecuador, at least with me. So I just leave my email before, but you can find it in the chat, and a link where you can find some of these debates. But thank you very much again, and there was wonderful exchange. I hope that this tribute is always to honor Maria Lugones, and I hope that Maria Lugones is here with us today in this exchange. Thank you.
Exactly. So we end our webinar here. So hope to see you again, all of you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so you can all leave the meeting. Okay, and the recording will be shared on the YouTube also.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Well, hope to see you in October to a new session. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye.